The crystal champagne flute exploded against marble as the most powerful man in pharmaceuticals collapsed, his body seizing violently among glittering shards. Blood frothed at his lips. His fingernails clawed at polished stone. 300 industry executives froze in horror as death stalked their golden ballroom. But she didn't freeze. A goddess in red silk dropped to her knees beside him, her hands finding his chest as his heart hammered beneath her palms. "Cyanide," she breathed, tasting bitter almonds on his gasping breath. "Someone's trying to murder you." His wild eyes found hers through the agony. Piercing blue, meeting determined brown as recognition flashed between them. "You're her," he rasped. "The doctor who wants to destroy everything I've built. Right now, I'm the only person who can save your life." She climbed into that ambulance, knowing his survival would either vindicate her life's mission or destroy her completely. The ambulance sirens wailed through the downtown streets as Nyla worked frantically to stabilize Rick during the race to Metropolitan General Hospital. His head rested against her shoulder in the cramped space, and she could feel each labored breath against her neck as she monitored his vital signs. "Stay with me," she whispered, her fingers pressed against his wrist to monitor his weakening pulse. "Whatever was in that champagne, we're going to figure it out." Rick's eyes fluttered open, focusing on her face with difficulty. Even in his compromised state, she could see the intelligence behind those eyes, the strength that had built an empire. "Why are you helping me?" he managed to whisper. "Because I'm a doctor," Nyla replied firmly, though something deeper stirred in her chest as their eyes met. "And because no one deserves to die from poisoning, regardless of what I think about their industry." Rick's fingers intertwined with hers, his grip surprisingly strong despite his weakness. "Dr. Fisher," he breathed, recognizing her from the conference materials. "The woman who's been challenging my company." "The woman who's been trying to save lives your drugs have endangered," she corrected, but her voice held no venom now. Only professional concern, mixed with something unexpected, a growing awareness of the man beneath the corporate titan. "My father," Rick whispered as another wave of tremors hit him. "He died from pharmaceutical interactions, wrong combinations. I've been trying to fix it, but the board." His words trailed off as consciousness slipped away again. But they hit Nyla like a physical blow. She'd assumed he was just another profit-driven executive, but his vulnerable confession suggested layers she'd never considered. The ambulance lurched to a stop outside the emergency bay, and Nyla's professional mode kicked into overdrive. As they wheeled Rick through the automatic doors, she barked orders to the trauma team with the authority of someone who'd saved countless lives in crisis situations. 38-year-old male, suspected pharmaceutical poisoning, onset 30 minutes ago. Symptoms include severe tremors, tachycardia, dilated pupils, and altered consciousness. I need a full tox screen, IV access, and prepare for gastric lavage. Dr. Robert Fairchild, the hospital's chief of staff and Nyla's longtime mentor, appeared at her side. "Nyla, what are you doing here? This isn't your shift." "I was at the pharmaceutical gala when he collapsed," she explained, not taking her eyes off Rick as the trauma team transferred him to the treatment table. "Someone poisoned him, Dr. Fairchild. This was deliberate." As they worked to stabilize Rick, Nyla found herself studying his face in repose. Without the corporate armor and commanding presence, he looked younger, more vulnerable. The sharp angles of his jawline softened in unconsciousness, and she noticed the worry lines around his eyes that spoke of burdens carried long before tonight's crisis. "His pulse is stabilizing," reported Dr. Martinez, one of the ER residents. "Whenever you get in the ambulance, it worked." Nyla felt a flutter of relief that surprised her with its intensity. This was supposed to be just another medical emergency, another life to save. But something about Rick Johnson, his unexpected vulnerability, his whispered confession about his father, the way his hand had found hers in the ambulance, had affected her more than it should have. What secrets had driven someone to poison one of the pharmaceutical industry's most powerful CEOs? And why did this man she planned to confront professionally suddenly seem like someone worth saving in ways that went far beyond medicine? The private hospital room felt like a sanctuary compared to the chaos of the emergency department. Rick's color had returned to normal, and his breathing had steadied into the deep rhythm of natural sleep, rather than the labored gasping of poisoning. Nyla had insisted on staying to monitor him personally, telling herself it was purely professional interest in such an unusual toxicology case. She sat in the chair beside his bed, reviewing the test results that confirmed her suspicions. The poison had been sophisticated, a carefully calibrated dose of digitalis glycosides that would have been fatal if she hadn't recognized the symptoms immediately and administered the correct antidote. Professional hit, she murmured to herself, studying the precise levels. Someone with pharmaceutical knowledge had tried to kill Rick Johnson, and they'd nearly succeeded. Rick's eyes opened slowly, focusing on her with clarity that hadn't been present during the ambulance ride. "You're still here," he said, his voice stronger now, though still rough from the ordeal. "I wanted to make sure you didn't have any delayed reactions," Nyla replied, though the excuse felt thin even to her own ears. "How are you feeling?" "Like I was hit by a truck," Rick admitted, attempting to sit up. Nyla immediately moved to help him, her hands supporting his shoulders as he adjusted his position. The simple touch sent an unexpected warmth through both of them, and their eyes met again with that same electric awareness from the ambulance. "Careful," she said softly, not immediately pulling her hands away. "Your system is still recovering." "You saved my life," Rick said, his gaze never leaving hers. "Someone I've never met, someone who has every reason to hate what I represent, and you saved my life without hesitation." "I told you, I'm a doctor, it's what I do." "No," Rick said firmly, his hand covering one of hers where it still rested on his shoulder. "It's who you are. There's a difference." The sincerity in his voice caught Nyla off guard. She'd expected corporate smooth talk, calculated charm designed to win her over. Instead, she heard genuine gratitude and something deeper, respect for her as both a physician and a person. "You mentioned your father in the ambulance," Nyla said quietly, settling back into her chair, but not pulling her hand free from his gentle grip. "You said he died from pharmaceutical interactions." Rick's expression darkened with old pain. He was taking 3 different medications from 3 different specialists. No one checked the interactions. The combination created a cascade of cardiac events that killed him over 6 months. He trusted the system. Trusted that someone was looking out for his safety. "Is that why you went into pharmaceuticals?" "I inherited the company when I was 25, Rick explained. "Too young, too idealistic. I thought I could honor his memory by making sure our drugs saved lives instead of ending them. But the board, the investors, the quarterly reports..." He trailed off, frustration evident in every line of his body. Nyla studied his face, seeing the weight of inherited responsibility and genuine anguish over his father's death. This wasn't the cold, profit-driven executive she'd expected to confront tonight. This was a man carrying the burden of family legacy and genuine desire to heal, constrained by corporate realities she'd never fully considered. "The digitalis poisoning," she said thoughtfully. "Whoever did this knew your medical history, knew exactly what would mimic your father's symptoms." Rick's eyes sharpened. "You think this was personal?" "I think someone wanted to send a very specific message," Nyla replied. "The question is whether they wanted to kill you or terrify you." Before Rick could respond, the door burst open and a younger man in an expensive suit strode in. The family resemblance was unmistakable. The same dark hair, the same sharp jawline, though this man's eyes held a hardness that Rick's lacked. "Jesus, Rick, what the hell happened?" the newcomer demanded, then stopped short when he noticed Nyla. His gaze swept over her with barely concealed suspicion. "Who are you?" "Thomas," Rick said wearily. "This is Dr. Nyla Fisher. She saved my life tonight." "Nyla, my brother Thomas, our legal counsel." Thomas Johnson's expression grew even more guarded. "Dr. Fisher, the one who's been writing papers criticizing our clinical trial protocols. The one who's been advocating for better safety standards and more diverse trial populations," Nyla corrected coolly, rising from her chair, "which given tonight's events seems particularly relevant." "You think this gives you some kind of access to my brother?" Thomas demanded, stepping protectively closer to Rick's bed. "Some opportunity to exploit his gratitude?" "Thomas," Rick warned, his voice carrying authority despite his weakened state, but Nyla held up a hand. her spine straightening with dignity. I think your brother nearly died tonight because someone in your industry has secrets worth killing for. I think whoever poisoned him knows pharmaceutical chemistry intimately. And I think you might want to consider that the woman you're viewing as a threat is the only reason your brother is alive right now." The brothers exchanged a loaded look that spoke of years of shared responsibility and protective instinct. Finally, Thomas's shoulders relaxed slightly. "I'm sorry," he said, though his tone remained formal. "It's been a difficult evening, and when someone threatens Rick—" "I understand family loyalty," Nyla replied. "But I'm not your enemy here. Someone tried to murder your brother tonight, using the same type of drug interactions that killed your father. If that doesn't tell you there's something seriously wrong in your company, I don't know what will." Rick reached for Nyla's hand again, his touch grounding her growing anger. "She's right, Thomas. This wasn't random. Someone knows our family history, knows our vulnerabilities." "The board meeting is tomorrow," Thomas said grimly. "Diane Hunter has been pushing for changes in leadership structure. If word gets out that you were poisoned at an industry gala—" "Let me worry about Diane and the board," Rick said firmly. "Right now, I need to figure out who tried to kill me and why." He looked up at Nyla, and she saw something new in his expression. Trust, gratitude, and the beginning of something deeper that made her pulse quicken despite every professional reason to maintain distance. "Will you help me?" he asked quietly. "Your expertise in toxicology, your understanding of pharmaceutical interactions. I need someone I can trust, someone who isn't part of the corporate machinery." The responsibility of the decisions settled over Nyla. Getting involved with Rick Johnson would complicate everything: her research, her advocacy work, her professional reputation. But looking into his eyes, seeing the genuine vulnerability beneath the corporate power, she found herself nodding. "I'll help you find who did this," she said. "But I have conditions. Name them. When this is over, when we've caught whoever tried to kill you, you listen to my recommendations about your clinical trials. Really listen, not just corporate lip service." Rick's smile was the first genuine one she'd seen from him, transforming his entire face. "Deal." As their hands remained clasped, both of them felt the undeniable shift happening between them. Professional duty was evolving into something more personal, more dangerous, and infinitely more compelling than either had expected. Neither of them realized that across town, the person who'd orchestrated Rick's poisoning was already planning their next move, one that would force them closer together, while threatening everything they were beginning to build. 3 hours later, Nyla sat in the hospital break room, her emerald gown replaced by scrubs, as she studied the toxicology reports that confirmed her worst fears. The poison that had nearly killed Rick was no random attack. It was a sophisticated pharmaceutical cocktail designed by someone with intimate knowledge of drug interactions. Her phone buzzed with the 5th call from a news outlet in the past hour. Word of Rick Johnson's collapse had already leaked, and the media was circling like vultures. She declined the call and returned to the lab results when a soft knock interrupted her concentration. "Dr. Fisher?" Rick stood in the doorway, looking remarkably recovered for someone who'd been dying 6 hours ago. He'd insisted on changing back into his clothes despite medical advice, and seeing him in his perfectly tailored suit again reminded her exactly who she was dealing with. "May I come in?" "You should be resting," Nyla said, though she gestured to the chair across from her. "Your system is still processing the antidote." "I needed to thank you properly," Rick said, settling into the chair with careful movements that betrayed his lingering weakness. "And to apologize for my brother's behavior. Thomas gets protective when he thinks someone might be using me." "Has that happened often?" Nyla asked, studying his face. Even exhausted, there was something compelling about his presence, an intelligence behind his eyes that spoke of more than corporate maneuvering. "More than I'd like to admit," Rick replied with surprising honesty. "When you inherit a billion-dollar company at 25, everyone wants something. It makes you cautious about people's motives." "And what do you think my motives are?" Rick leaned forward slightly, his gaze never leaving hers. "I think you're the first person in years who's helped me without wanting anything in return. You could have let me die tonight. It would have solved a lot of your problems with pharmaceutical accountability." The directness of his statement caught Nyla off guard. She'd expected corporate deflection, not this raw honesty about their professional opposition. "I became a doctor to save lives," she said quietly. "All lives, even when those lives complicate my mission. Your mission being to reform companies like mine, my mission being to make sure what happened to my grandmother never happens to anyone else." Rick's expression shifted, showing genuine interest rather than polite inquiry. "Tell me," Nyla hesitated. She'd never shared her grandmother's story with someone from the pharmaceutical industry, but something about this moment, the late hour, his near-death experience, the way he was looking at her with complete attention, made her want to trust him. "My grandmother was a community healer in rural Georgia," she began. "When diabetes complications forced her to rely on prescription medications, she trusted the system to keep her safe. But the clinical trials for her medications had included fewer than 3% Black participants. The dosing was wrong for her metabolism. The side effect profiles didn't account for her genetic markers. She died from pharmaceutical complications," Rick said quietly, understanding immediately. "She died from a system that didn't see her as worth including," Nyla corrected, her voice carrying years of controlled anger. "A system that developed drugs on white bodies and assumed they'd work the same way for everyone else." Rick was quiet for a long moment, and Nyla could see him processing not just her words, but their implications for his own company. When he spoke again, his voice carried a weight she hadn't heard before. "My father died the same way," he said. "Different cause, same systemic failure. Multiple medications, no one checking interactions, no one taking responsibility for the whole patient instead of individual prescriptions." Their eyes met across the small table, and something shifted between them. A recognition of shared loss, shared frustration with a system they'd both tried to change from different sides. "The digitalis that poisoned you tonight," Nyla said carefully. "It's the same class of drug that contributed to your father's cardiac cascade." Rick's jaw tightened. "Someone wanted me to die the same way he did. Or someone wanted to send you a very personal message about pharmaceutical safety." Before Rick could respond, the break room door burst open and Thomas Johnson strode in, followed by an elegant woman in her 50s, with steel-gray hair and sharp eyes, that immediately assessed the intimate atmosphere of their conversation. "Rick, thank God you're all right," the woman said, though her gaze remained fixed on Nyla with obvious calculation. "When we heard about the incident at the gala, Diane," Rick said, rising with visible effort, "I didn't expect to see you here." Diane Hunter, Nyla realized. The board member Thomas had mentioned, the one pushing for leadership changes. She studied the older woman's perfectly composed expression and expensive designer suit, sensing layers of agenda beneath the concerned facade. "Of course I came," Diane replied smoothly. "The board is naturally concerned about your welfare, and about how this incident might affect company stability." Her eyes flicked to Nyla again. "I wasn't aware you were receiving visitors who aren't family or legal counsel." "Dr. Fisher saved my life," Rick said firmly. "She's here as my physician." "How fortunate," Diane said, her tone suggesting anything but. "Dr. Fisher, I believe we've met professionally. You've been quite vocal about our industry's clinical trial protocols. I've been vocal about the need for inclusive research that protects all patients," Nyla replied evenly, standing to match Diane's power posture. "Something that might have prevented tonight's poisoning if proper safety protocols had been followed." "Are you suggesting this incident was related to pharmaceutical safety?" Thomas asked sharply. "I'm stating that someone with extensive pharmaceutical knowledge tried to kill your brother using the same type of drug interactions that have been killing patients for decades," Nyla replied. "The sophistication of the poison suggests inside knowledge of your company's research." Diane's expression grew even more controlled. "That's quite an accusation, Dr. Fisher. I hope you have evidence to support such claims." "I have toxicology reports that show a deliberate pharmaceutical cocktail," Nyla said, meeting Diane's challenging gaze. "And I have experience treating patients whose deaths could have been prevented if companies prioritize safety over profits." The tension in the room ratcheted higher, and Nyla could feel the corporate machinery beginning to close ranks against her outsider presence. But Rick surprised her by moving closer, his proximity offering subtle support. Dr. Fisher's expertise might be exactly what we need to understand what happened tonight, he said, his voice carrying CEO authority despite his weakened state. Someone tried to kill me, and they knew enough about pharmaceutical chemistry to nearly succeed. Rick, Diane said carefully, perhaps we should discuss this privately. The board will need to control the narrative around this incident, and involving outside parties. The outside party saved my life, Rick interrupted. And if someone on the inside tried to take it, I'd rather trust her expertise than assume everyone around me has my best interests at heart. The implication hung heavy in the air. Diane's perfectly controlled mask slipped for just a moment, revealing something colder underneath before she recovered her composure. Of course, she said smoothly, the board simply wants to protect you and the company from any further threats. Then help me find who did this, Rick replied, because until we know who poisoned me and why, none of us are safe. As the corporate powers circled around Rick with their protection and control, Nyla felt the weight of the world she was stepping into. This wasn't just about saving one man's life anymore. It was about challenging an entire system that had been failing patients like her grandmother for decades. But when Rick's eyes found hers across the tension-filled room, when she saw the trust and something deeper growing there, she knew she was already too invested to walk away. Someone had tried to kill Rick Johnson with the very pharmaceutical knowledge she'd spent her career mastering. And the deeper she dug into the corporate machinery surrounding him, the more she realized that saving his life might have been the easy part. 2 days later, Nyla found herself in Rick's penthouse apartment, overlooking the city, surrounded by confidential pharmaceutical files that would have been worth millions to his competitors. The morning sun streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows, casting everything in golden light as she studied research documents that painted a disturbing picture of corporate manipulation. "This is incredible," she murmured, looking up from a stack of suppressed safety reports. "Your company has been sitting on data about cardiovascular risks for 3 years." Behind her, Rick paced with careful movements, still moving carefully, but with growing strength. He'd insisted on leaving the hospital despite medical advice, claiming he needed to investigate the poisoning from his private office. The real reason, Nyla suspected, was that he trusted her more than anyone else to help him uncover the truth. "I never saw those reports," Rick said, frustration evident in his voice. "Richard Green, our CFO, told me the safety committee had cleared all cardiovascular concerns." "Someone's been filtering information to you," Nyla replied, spreading the documents across his dining table. "The question is whether they were protecting you or setting you up." She stood to reach for another file, and Rick moved to help her, their bodies brushing as they both reached for the same document. The contact sent warmth spreading through both of them, a reminder of the attraction that had been building beneath their professional collaboration. "Sorry," Rick said softly, but he didn't step away. Instead, he found himself studying the way the morning light caught the gold undertones in Nyla's brown skin, the way her natural curls had escaped from her professional updo to frame her face. "The cardiac data shows a clear pattern," Nyla said, trying to focus on the papers despite her awareness of Rick's closeness. "Higher adverse events in older patients, significantly higher risks for women, and almost no data on how these drugs affect different ethnic populations." "Just like your grandmother," Rick said quietly. "Just like thousands of patients whose doctors never knew the real risks," Nyla confirmed. "Someone's been systematically hiding safety data while your company continued marketing these drugs as universally safe." Rick sank into the chair beside her, the weight of corporate betrayal evident in every line of his body. "I've been so focused on quarterly reports and board meetings that I never questioned why the safety data looked so clean. I wanted to believe we were helping people." "You can still help people," Nyla said, her hand finding his shoulder in a gesture of comfort that felt more natural than it should have. "But it means challenging everyone who's been lying to you, including people I trust," Rick said, looking up at her with an expression that made her pulse quicken. "The poisoning wasn't random, was it? Someone wanted me to stop asking questions. Or someone wanted to silence you before you discovered what they've been hiding." Their eyes met and held, and Nyla felt the shift happening between them again. The way professional respect was deepening into something more personal, more dangerous. Rick's palm settled over her fingers, his thumb tracing gentle circles against her skin. "Why are you helping me?" he asked quietly. "You could have exposed this data yourself, destroyed my company's reputation, without giving me a chance to fix it." "Because I don't think you're the enemy," Nyla replied, her voice softer than she'd intended. "I think you're a man trying to honor his father's memory, who's been surrounded by people with their own agendas." "And what's your agenda, Dr. Fisher?" The way he said her name, with that mixture of respect and growing intimacy, made her heart race. "To save lives, to make sure the system works for everyone, not just the privileged few." "Including me?" "Especially you," she said, then caught herself at the admission. "Because you have the power to change things, to make pharmaceutical research actually serve all patients." Rick stood slowly, his movement bringing him closer to her chair, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to maintain eye contact. "What if I can't change things? What if the corruption goes too deep?" "Then we expose it all," Nyla said firmly. "But I don't think you're going to let that happen. I think you're going to fight for what's right, even if it costs you everything." "It might cost me my company," Rick said. "My family's legacy, my brother's future, everything I've worked to build." "But you'll save lives," Nyla replied, "including your own, because whoever poisoned you isn't finished." Rick's expression grew serious. "The security team found traces of surveillance equipment in my office. Someone's been monitoring my activities for months." "They know you're getting close to something," Nyla said, rising from her chair to face him fully. "Which means we need to be careful. If they tried to kill you once, they'll try again," Rick finished. "Unless we expose them first." The reality of their situation settled around them. The danger they were both in. The powerful forces working against them. The professional and personal risks of their growing partnership. But instead of pulling back, they found themselves moving closer together. "Nyla," Rick said quietly, his hand reaching up to cup her cheek. "I need you to know that whatever happens, whatever we discover in these files, you've already changed everything for me." "Rick," she whispered, her professional reservations warring with the attraction she could no longer deny. "I know this complicates everything," he continued, his thumb tracing the line of her cheekbone. "I know you have every reason not to trust me, not to get involved with someone from the industry you're fighting." "I should walk away," Nyla said, but her body betrayed her words by swaying closer to his touch. "Yes, you should," Rick agreed, his other hand settling at her waist. "But I'm hoping you won't." The space between them disappeared as Rick leaned down and Nyla rose to meet him. Their lips touched in a kiss that started gentle, but quickly deepened as months of professional tension transformed into something entirely different. Nyla's hands found the lapels of his shirt, using them to pull him closer as years of fighting pharmaceutical companies suddenly seemed less important than this moment, this connection with this particular man. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard, and the careful professional distance they'd maintained had evaporated completely. "This changes everything," Nyla whispered against his lips. "Everything was already changing," Rick replied, his forehead resting against hers. "From the moment you chose to save my life instead of letting me die." "I couldn't let you die," she said softly. "Even before I knew who you really were. I couldn't let you die. And now that you know who I really am." Nyla looked into his eyes, seeing not the pharmaceutical CEO she'd planned to confront, but the man who'd been betrayed by his own company, who'd inherited burdens he was still learning to carry, who trusted her enough to share his most dangerous secrets. "Now I think we're both in more danger than we realized," she said, "but I'm not walking away." Rick's smile was tender and relieved. "Good. Because I think I'm falling in love with you, Dr. Nyla Fisher. And I have a feeling that's going to complicate everything." Before Nyla could respond to his devastating admission, her phone rang with an urgent tone that shattered the intimate moment. The hospital emergency number flashed on the screen, and her medical training kicked in immediately. "Dr. Fisher," she answered, stepping slightly away from Rick, but keeping her eyes on his face. "Nyla, thank God," came Dr. Fairchild's tense voice. We need you here immediately. 3 patients have been admitted with pharmaceutical poisoning, and they all work for Johnson Pharmaceuticals. The attack on Rick hadn't been isolated. Someone was systematically targeting anyone who might help him uncover the truth, and now the woman he was falling in love with was walking directly into their crosshairs. The hospital emergency department buzzed with controlled chaos as Nyla worked frantically to save the 3 Johnson Pharmaceuticals employees who'd been systematically poisoned. Rick had insisted on coming despite her protests, and now he stood at the edge of the trauma bay, watching his people fight for their lives. Same pharmaceutical cocktail as your poisoning, Nyla reported grimly as she monitored the vitals of Dr. Sarah Chen, a research scientist who'd been working late in the lab, but delivered in higher concentrations. Someone wanted to make sure these attacks were fatal. Sarah's been reviewing our cardiovascular data, Rick said, his voice tight with guilt and fury. She came to me yesterday with concerns about the safety reports. And now, she's fighting for her life. Nyla replied, adjusting Sarah's IV drip with practiced efficiency. Along with your head of clinical trials and your compliance officer, someone's eliminating witnesses. The other 2 victims, Michael Rodriguez from clinical trials and Janet Wu from compliance, were stabilized in adjacent treatment rooms, but their conditions remained critical. Nyla moved between all 3 patients with the fluid expertise of someone who'd spent years treating pharmaceutical poisoning cases. Dr. Fisher, called Dr. Martinez from across the treatment area. We need you on bed 3. His cardiac rhythm is becoming erratic. Nyla rushed to Michael's bedside, her hands moving swiftly to adjust his medications while Rick watched with growing admiration for her clinical skills. Even in crisis, she commanded the emergency team with quiet authority, saving lives with the same dedication she'd shown when rescuing him. Rick, Thomas appeared at his brother's side, his face grim. The board is meeting an emergency session. Diane's calling for immediate leadership changes, claiming you're compromised and putting the company at risk. Let her call, Rick replied without taking his eyes off Nyla as she worked to stabilize Michael's heart rhythm. These people were poisoned because they were helping me investigate safety violations. That tells me everything I need to know about who's really compromised. The media's picked up the story, Thomas continued. Multiple Johnson Pharmaceuticals employees poisoned in coordinated attack. Stock prices are plummeting. Good, Rick said flatly. Maybe now people will pay attention to what's really happening in our industry. Thomas stared at his brother in shock. Good? Rick, this is our family's company we're talking about. Our family's company has been lying to the FDA and hiding safety data that could have prevented deaths, Rick replied. If exposing that destroys our stock price, then maybe we deserve to lose everything. Before Thomas could respond, Nyla approached them, pulling off her latex gloves with weary satisfaction. They're all stable. Critical, but stable. We caught the poisonings early enough to prevent permanent damage. Because you knew what to look for, Rick said, his gratitude and something deeper evident in his voice. Because you'd already seen this exact poison combination. Someone sending a very clear message, Nyla agreed. Stop investigating or more people die. Then we'd better solve this quickly, Rick said, his hand finding hers in a gesture that felt natural despite Thomas's watchful presence. Before they escalate to targeting people outside the company. People like me, Nyla said quietly, meeting his gaze with steady courage that made his chest tighten with protective instinct. No one's going to hurt you, Rick said fiercely. I won't let that happen. Rick, Thomas interrupted, his voice carrying a warning. Diane Hunter's here. She's asking to speak with you privately. Through the emergency department's glass doors, they could see Diane Hunter approaching with 2 men in expensive suits, corporate lawyers, Nyla realized, recognizing the predatory look of legal professionals preparing for battle. She brought reinforcements, Nyla observed. Corporate damage control, Rick said grimly. They're going to try to contain this before it spreads further. Mr. Johnson, Diane's voice carried across the emergency department as she approached with her legal team. We need to discuss the company's response to these tragic incidents. The company's response should be full cooperation with law enforcement, Rick replied evenly, and complete transparency about our safety data. Rick, one of the lawyers said smoothly. Perhaps we should discuss this somewhere more private, away from. His gaze flicked dismissively toward Nyla. Outside parties. Dr. Fisher isn't an outside party, Rick said, his voice carrying CEO authority despite the hospital setting. She's the medical expert who saved 4 Johnson Pharmaceuticals' lives in the past 3 days. Her expertise is exactly what we need right now. Her expertise in attacking pharmaceutical companies, Diane corrected coldly. Rick, I understand you're grateful for her medical intervention, but allowing someone with her agenda access to our internal crisis. Her agenda is saving lives, Rick interrupted. Which, last I checked, was supposed to be our agenda too. The corporate tension crackled between them, and Nyla felt the weight of powerful interests aligning against her presence. But Rick moved closer to her, his proximity offering subtle support that didn't go unnoticed by the corporate lawyers. The board is concerned about your judgment, Diane continued carefully. The stress of recent events, the trauma of your own poisoning, and now this, personal involvement with someone who's been publicly critical of our industry. Are you questioning my competence? Rick asked dangerously. We're questioning your objectivity, one of the lawyers replied, and your ability to make decisions that serve the company's best interests rather than other interests. The implication hung heavy in the air, and Nyla felt her professional reputation being systematically attacked by people who saw her as a threat to their corporate control. My interest, Rick said coldly, is preventing more of my employees from being murdered. If that conflicts with the board's interests, then maybe the board is the problem. Rick, Thomas said quietly, think about what you're saying. Think about the consequences. I am thinking about consequences, Rick replied. I'm thinking about the consequences of hiding safety data, of prioritizing profits over patients, of allowing corruption to flourish while people die from preventable pharmaceutical interactions. He turned to face Diane and her legal team directly. Someone tried to kill me to prevent me from discovering how deeply this corruption runs. Then they tried to kill 3 more people who were helping me investigate. If you think I'm going to prioritize stock prices over stopping those murders, you don't know me at all. What we know, Diane said carefully, is that your association with Dr. Fisher has compromised your ability to think clearly about company interests. My association with Dr. Fisher has opened my eyes to problems I should have been addressing years ago, Rick corrected. And if that makes me unfit for leadership in your opinion, then maybe it's time for new leadership. The corporate team exchanged loaded glances, and Nyla realized she was witnessing a boardroom coup disguised as concern for Rick's welfare. They were using his relationship with her as justification for seizing control. We'll discuss this at tomorrow's board meeting, Diane said smoothly. In the meantime, I strongly recommend that you distance yourself from any influences that might affect your judgment. After they left, the emergency department felt almost peaceful in comparison. Rick stood quietly for a moment, and Nyla could see him processing the full implications of what had just occurred. They're going to try to remove you as CEO, she said quietly. Let them try, Rick replied. But first, we're going to expose exactly what they're protecting. Rick, Nyla said carefully. Maybe they're right. Maybe my involvement is compromising your position. Rick turned to face her fully, his hands framing her face with gentle intensity. My position was already compromised the moment I inherited a company built on lies. You didn't cause that. You're helping me fix it. At the cost of everything you've worked for. What I've worked for doesn't matter if it's built on a foundation of hidden deaths and suppressed safety data, Rick said firmly. My father died believing pharmaceutical companies were working to save lives. I won't dishonor his memory by protecting corruption. The conviction in his voice, the way he was willing to sacrifice everything for what was right, made Nyla's heart race with something deeper than attraction. This was a man she could not only love, but respect. Someone whose values aligned with her deepest beliefs about medicine and justice. What happens now? She asked. Now we go back to my apartment, and we go through every piece of evidence until we find proof of who's behind these poisonings, Rick said. And then we make sure they can never hurt anyone again. Together? Together, Rick confirmed, his thumb tracing her cheekbone with tender certainty. Because I meant what I said earlier, I'm falling in love with you, Nyla Fisher. And I'm not letting anyone, not the board, not the lawyers, not the people trying to kill us, take that away. As they left the hospital together, neither of them noticed the figure watching from the parking garage or the phone call being made to report their every move. The people orchestrating the poisonings were already planning their next strike, and this time, they weren't taking any chances on survivors. Back in Rick's penthouse, the city lights twinkled below as they spread pharmaceutical documents across every surface of his living room. The evening had deepened into night, and the intimate atmosphere of working together in his private space heightened the awareness that had been building between them all day. "Look at this," Nyla said, her voice tight with controlled anger as she studied a suppressed clinical trial report. "Your CFO, Richard Green, has been systematically burying adverse event data for over 2 years. Heart attacks, strokes, liver failures, all documented but never reported to the FDA." Rick moved behind her chair to look over her shoulder at the damning evidence, his presence warm and solid against her back. "Those signatures, those are board members who approved the suppression, including Diane Hunter. They've been using your company to conduct unethical research while keeping you uninformed," Nyla said, tilting her head back to meet his eyes. "You weren't just deceived, Rick. You were deliberately isolated from your own company's crimes." The weight of betrayal settled over Rick's shoulders, but what struck him most was the fierce protectiveness in Nyla's voice as she defended him against his own board members. She'd gone from viewing him as the enemy to becoming his most loyal advocate. "Why?" he asked quietly, his hands settling on her shoulders in a gesture that felt both comforting and electric. "Why would they hide this from me?" "Because they needed a CEO with clean hands," Nyla replied, leaning back into his touch. "Someone who could testify honestly that he had no knowledge of safety violations, someone whose reputation could protect the company if investigations ever surfaced." "A patsy," Rick said bitterly. "A scapegoat," Nyla corrected, turning in her chair to face him fully. "But also someone they couldn't control completely. Your father's death made you ask too many questions about drug safety. They had to manage you carefully." Rick's hands moved to frame her face, his thumbs tracing the elegant line of her cheekbones. "Until you came along and taught me what questions to ask. I taught you to trust your instincts," Nyla said softly. "The instincts that made you want to honor your father's memory by actually saving lives." The space between them seemed to shimmer with unspoken possibility. They'd been dancing around their attraction for days. But now, surrounded by evidence of corporate betrayal and facing threats that could destroy them both, the careful professional distance felt impossible to maintain. "Nyla," Rick said quietly, his voice rough with emotion, "I need you to know something. What I said at the hospital, about falling in love with you." "I know," she whispered, her hands covering his where they cupped her face. "I feel it too." "This could destroy everything," Rick continued. "Your career, your reputation, your safety. Being with me makes you a target." "Being without you would destroy something more important," Nyla replied, rising from her chair to close the distance between them. "It would destroy the chance to save lives together, to reform a system that's been failing patients for too long." "And us?" Rick asked, his forehead touching hers. "What about the chance for us? I spent my entire career fighting pharmaceutical companies," Nyla said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I never imagined I'd fall in love with a pharmaceutical CEO." "Have you?" Rick asked, his hands moving to her waist, pulling her closer. "Fallen in love with me?" Instead of answering with words, Nyla rose on her toes and kissed him with a passion that spoke of months of professional tension transforming into something deeper and more dangerous. Rick responded immediately, his arms encircling her as years of careful corporate control dissolved in the face of genuine emotion. When they broke apart, both were breathing hard, and the pharmaceutical documents scattered around them seemed far less important than the connection blazing between them. "I love you," Nyla whispered against his lips. "I love your dedication to your father's memory, your willingness to sacrifice everything for what's right, the way you've chosen truth over corporate protection." "I love your brilliance," Rick replied, his hands threading through her curls. "Your courage, the way you save lives without hesitation, the way you've made me see possibilities I never knew existed." Rick, Nyla said softly, if we do this, if we cross this line completely, there's no going back. The board will use it against you, the media will question my objectivity, and the people trying to kill us will see it as another weakness to exploit. Let them try, Rick said fiercely. I've spent my entire adult life being careful, being controlled, being the CEO everyone expected me to be. For the first time, I want to be just a man who's desperately in love with an extraordinary woman. Are you sure? Nyla asked, though her body was already swaying closer to his. I've never been more sure of anything, Rick replied, his hands moving to the small of her back. I want you, Nyla. Not just tonight, but for whatever future we can build together. The city lights cast golden shadows across the room as Rick led her toward his bedroom, both of them moving with the careful reverence of people who understood they were crossing a threshold that would change everything. The pharmaceutical documents could wait. This moment, this connection, felt more important than any corporate crisis. In the soft lamplight of his bedroom, they came together with a passion that had been building since the moment she'd chosen to save his life instead of letting him die. Rick's hands explored the graceful curves of her body with tender worship, while Nyla's touch seemed to heal wounds he hadn't even known he carried. You're so beautiful, Rick whispered, as he traced the elegant line of her collarbone, his lips following the path his fingers had mapped. Beautiful and brilliant and brave. You make me feel beautiful, Nyla replied, her hands moving across the strong planes of his chest, feeling the steady heartbeat she'd fought so hard to preserve. You make me feel like I'm exactly where I belong. Their lovemaking was a conversation conducted in touches and sighs, a physical manifestation of the trust they built through shared crisis and common purpose. When Rick's hands moved to worship the rich mahogany of her skin, when Nyla's fingers threaded through his dark hair as she pulled him closer, they were writing a new chapter in both their lives. I love you, Rick whispered as they moved together in perfect harmony, their bodies finding a rhythm that spoke of souls recognizing their match. I love everything about you. I love you too. Nyla breathed against his neck, her world narrowing to this moment, this man, this perfect union of hearts and bodies that felt both inevitable and miraculous. Time seemed suspended as they discovered each other completely, professional barriers dissolving in the face of intimate connection that went far beyond the physical. When Nyla's quiet gasps of pleasure filled the room, when Rick's control finally shattered in the face of overwhelming love, they both felt something fundamental shift between them. Afterward, they lay entwined in the soft sheets, Rick's arms holding Nyla close as city lights painted patterns across their skin. The dangerous documents in the living room, the corporate threats circling them, the attempts on their lives, all of it felt secondary to this profound connection they'd just acknowledged and celebrated. What happens now? Nyla asked softly, her head resting on Rick's chest where she could hear the steady heartbeat that had become precious to her. Now we finish what we started, Rick replied, his fingers combing gently through her curls. We expose the corruption, we save your patience and mine, and we build something together that's stronger than anything they can throw at us. Together, Nyla said, not a question, but a statement of shared commitment. Together, Rick confirmed, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. Because I'm not letting you go, Dr. Nyla Fisher. Not for the board, not for the media, not for anyone. But even as they held each other in the aftermath of their lovemaking, Rick's phone buzzed with an urgent message that would shatter their temporary peace. The text was from an unknown number, but its meaning was crystal clear. Stop digging, or she dies next. Someone had been watching them, photographing them, and now Nyla wasn't just Rick's ally in exposing pharmaceutical corruption. She was their primary target for elimination. The people orchestrating the poisonings had just declared war on the woman Rick loved, and they had no idea that their threat had just sealed their own fate. Because a man in love would fight harder than any CEO protecting corporate interests, and Nyla Fisher had never backed down from a fight that could save lives. The threatening text message shattered their intimate peace like cold water. Rick's entire body tensed as he read the words again, his protective instincts roaring to life as he pulled Nyla closer against his chest. They're watching us, he said grimly, showing her the phone screen. They know exactly where we are and what we're doing. Nyla's medical training kicked in, her mind immediately assessing threats and calculating responses, even as her heart raced with fear. The timing isn't coincidental. They waited until after she gestured to their entwined bodies, until we were most vulnerable. They wanted to make it personal, Rick said, his voice carrying deadly calm that spoke of executive decision-making under pressure. They're not just threatening your life, they're threatening what we've built together. Rick, Nyla said quietly, sitting up and reaching for her clothes. Maybe I should go back to my apartment. Distance myself from you until we can expose them. Absolutely not, Rick replied immediately, his hand catching hers before she could move away. Running now won't protect you, it'll just make you an easier target, and I'm not letting you face this alone. As if summoned by their conversation, Rick's phone rang, with Thomas's distinctive ringtone. Rick answered, while Nyla quickly dressed, both of them understanding that their private sanctuary had been irrevocably compromised. Rick, where are you? Thomas's voice carried tension and urgency. The board called an emergency meeting for tomorrow morning. Diane's forcing a vote of no confidence. Let her, Rick said, watching Nyla move with the fluid efficiency of someone accustomed to crisis situations. I have evidence that will destroy her credibility permanently. What kind of evidence? The kind that proves she's been complicit in suppressing pharmaceutical safety data while patients died from preventable interactions, Rick replied. The kind that will send her to federal prison. Thomas was quiet for a long moment. Rick, if you're right about this, if the corruption goes that deep, then you're not just fighting for the company anymore. You're fighting for your life. I know, Rick said, his eyes never leaving Nyla as she gathered the pharmaceutical documents with practiced organization. Someone's already made that clear. What do you mean? I mean, someone just threatened to kill Dr. Fisher if we don't stop investigating, Rick said flatly. So now we have 12 hours to gather enough evidence to destroy them before they destroy us. After ending the call, Rick found Nyla in his living room, surrounded by organized stacks of documents that painted a comprehensive picture of corporate malfeasance. Her ability to synthesize complex medical and legal information impressed him even under these circumstances. I've identified the pattern, she said without looking up. Richard Green has been systematically suppressing adverse event reports for drugs that affect cardiac rhythm, blood clotting, and liver function. The deaths he's hidden number in the thousands. Enough for federal prosecution? Enough for multiple life sentences, Nyla confirmed, finally meeting his eyes. But only if we can get this evidence to the right people before they silence us permanently. Rick moved to sit beside her on the couch, his presence offering comfort and strength in equal measure. Federal prosecutors will need expert medical testimony to understand the significance of this data. They'll need someone who can explain how suppressing diversity in clinical trials led to deaths in underrepresented populations, Nyla agreed. Someone who understands both the medical science and the human cost. They'll need you, Rick said quietly. Your expertise, your credibility, your understanding of how pharmaceutical companies have historically failed minority patients. And they'll need you, Nyla replied, her hand finding his. Someone on the inside who can authenticate these documents, who can testify about how the board systematically deceived their own CEO. The weight of what they were undertaking settled around them. Not just exposing corporate corruption, but risking everything they'd built together to save lives they'd never meet. But instead of feeling overwhelming, their shared purpose felt empowering. There's something else, Rick said carefully. If we do this, if we take down the board and expose everything, Johnson Pharmaceuticals might not survive the scandal. Is that what worries you? Nyla asked, losing your family's company? Rick was quiet for a moment, considering her question with the honesty their relationship deserved. A month ago, it would have terrified me. The company was my father's legacy, my grandfather's dream, everything I thought defined my purpose. And now? Now I think my father's real legacy is the belief that medicine should save lives, not profit from suffering, Rick said. If destroying the company is what it takes to honor that legacy, then maybe that's what needs to happen. Nyla's expression softened with love and admiration. You're willing to sacrifice everything. I'm willing to sacrifice everything except you, Rick corrected, his hand tightening around hers. Because loving you has taught me the difference between protecting what matters and protecting what people expect me to value. Before Nyla could respond, her phone rang with Dr. Fairchild's emergency number. She answered immediately, her medical instincts taking precedence over personal concerns. "Nyla, thank God," came her mentor's urgent voice. "We have another poisoning victim, but this one's different. The patient is asking specifically for you." "Who is it?" Nyla asked, though something in Dr. Fairchild's tone suggested she wasn't going to like the answer. "Richard Green, CFO of Johnson Pharmaceuticals. And Nyla, he says he has information about who's really behind these attacks." Rick's face went deadly pale as he heard his CFO's name. The man they'd identified as the primary architect of the cover-up was now a victim himself, suggesting that the corruption reached even higher than they'd suspected. "We'll be right there," Nyla said, already reaching for her jacket. "Nyla," Dr. Fairchild continued, "be careful. Mr. Green specifically said that if he doesn't survive the night, the real killer will come for you next." He seemed terrified of someone even more than he was of dying. As they prepared to leave for the hospital, Rick stopped Nyla at the door, his hands framing her face with desperate tenderness. "Whatever Richard tells us, whatever we learn tonight, I need you to know something," he said urgently. "I love you more than I've ever loved anything, more than the company, more than my family's legacy, more than my own life." "Rick," Nyla whispered, seeing the fear beneath his strength. "If something happens to me, if they succeed in eliminating me before we can expose them, promise me you'll keep fighting. Promise me you'll make sure their crimes don't stay hidden." "Nothing's going to happen to you," Nyla said fiercely. "We're going to expose them together, and we're going to save lives together, and we're going to have a future together. Promise me," Rick insisted. "I promise," Nyla said, sealing the vow with a kiss that tasted of love and determination and desperate hope. "But only if you promise me the same thing. If they come for me—" "They won't," Rick interrupted with deadly certainty, "because I'll destroy anyone who tries to hurt you." As they headed toward the hospital and Richard Green's deathbed confession, neither of them realized that the real architect of the pharmaceutical conspiracy was already waiting for them, someone with the power to orchestrate corporate board meetings and medical assassinations with equal efficiency, someone who had been watching their love story unfold while planning to end it permanently. The ICU at Metropolitan General felt like a war zone as Rick and Nyla rushed toward Richard Green's bedside. The CFO who'd been orchestrating the cover-up for years now lay dying from the same pharmaceutical cocktail he'd helped create, his face gray with the knowledge that his corporate masters had turned on him. "Rick," Richard gasped as they approached his bed, "thank God you're here. I need to tell you everything before they finish what they started." "Who poisoned you, Richard?" Rick demanded, though his voice carried the weight of someone who suspected the answer would shatter everything he thought he knew. "Not who you think," Richard whispered, his eyes darting nervously toward the ICU entrance. "The board, Diane Hunter, they're not the real power. They're just middle management like me." Nyla checked his monitors with professional efficiency while listening to every word. His vitals were declining rapidly, and she could see that whoever had poisoned him had used a more aggressive formula than the others. They'd wanted him dead quickly. "Who's really behind this?" Nyla asked urgently. "Who's been ordering the cover-ups?" "Corporate bribes, covering up deaths." Richard struggled to continue. "Someone's been paying us millions to hide safety data, silence anyone who asks questions." Rick's world tilted on its axis. "What are you talking about?" "Your father," Richard gasped. "He found out. He was going to expose them. The drug interactions that killed him, they weren't accidental. They were field testing." "My father was murdered," Rick said, his voice hollow with the devastating realization. "Agent Michael Torres," Richard continued weakly, "defense contractor posing as federal investigator. He's been controlling the board, controlling the research, controlling everything. The poisonings aren't about corporate corruption. They're about eliminating witnesses to government-sanctioned human experimentation." Nyla felt ice flooding her veins as the full scope of the conspiracy became clear. The clinical trials, the suppressed safety data, all designed to hide the fact that we've been developing weapons that look like pharmaceutical side effects, Richard confirmed. "Heart attacks, strokes, liver failures, all deliverable through medications that appear legitimate." "Where's the evidence?" Rick demanded, My office safe, Richard whispered. Combination is your father's birthday. All the real research, all the defense contracts, all the kill orders. His breathing became more labored. Rick, they're going to eliminate everyone who knows, starting with Dr. Fisher. Why me specifically? Nyla asked, though she suspected she already knew. Because you've been documenting the exact patterns they're trying to hide, Richard said. Your research on pharmaceutical safety in minority populations, you've been accidentally tracking their human experiments. Your work is the key to exposing everything. Before any of them could respond, the ICU doors opened, and Agent Michael Torres walked in with two men who definitely weren't hospital security. Rick recognized Torres from their previous encounters, the helpful federal investigator, and asking all the right questions while orchestrating the very crimes he pretended to investigate. Mr. Green, Torres said with cold efficiency. I'm disappointed. We had an agreement about discretion. Rick, run, Richard gasped with his last breath. Take her and run. They're going to... The monitors flatlined as Richard Green died. Taking his secrets with him, except for the crucial information he'd already shared. Torres's expression showed no emotion at watching a man die, confirming everything Rick needed to know about who they were really fighting. Mr. Johnson, Dr. Fisher, Torres said pleasantly, as if they'd met for coffee instead of witnessing a murder. I think we need to have a conversation about national security and the unfortunate consequences of civilian curiosity. You killed him, Nyla said, her medical training warring with her horror at watching deliberate murder disguised as natural death. Mr. Green died from pharmaceutical complications, Torres replied smoothly. The same complications that have unfortunately affected several Johnson Pharmaceuticals employees recently. Tragic, really, how dangerous these medications can be when people don't follow proper protocols. Rick moved protectively closer to Nyla, his mind racing through everything Richard had revealed. His father's death, the suppressed research, the defense contracts, all of it orchestrated by the man standing before them with casual authority over life and death. What do you want? Rick asked, though he already knew the answer. I want Dr. Fisher's research files destroyed, Torres said simply. I want her testimony about pharmaceutical safety patterns to disappear. And I want both of you to understand that some secrets are worth more than individual lives. You've been using my company to develop chemical weapons, Rick said, his voice carrying deadly calm. We've been using your company to develop defensive countermeasures, Torres corrected. Medications that can neutralize foreign chemical attacks by mimicking natural pharmaceutical side effects. It's cutting-edge biodefense technology. It's murder disguised as medicine, Nyla said fiercely. You've been testing these weapons on patients who thought they were receiving legitimate treatment. Acceptable losses in the service of national security, Torres replied with chilling indifference. Dr. Fisher, your grandmother's death. For example, valuable data about genetic variations in drug metabolism that helped us refine targeting protocols. Nyla's vision blurred with rage and grief. Her grandmother hadn't just died from pharmaceutical complications. She'd been deliberately murdered as part of weapons testing, her death contributing to research designed to kill more efficiently. You bastard, she whispered. I'm a patriot, Torres corrected, and patriots make hard choices about acceptable casualties. Rick's hand found Nyla's, squeezing gently to keep her grounded, while his own fury built to dangerous levels. And now you want us to stay quiet about mass murder because you've labeled it national defense. I want you to consider the alternatives, Torres said, nodding to his companions who moved closer with practiced intimidation. Dr. Fisher could have a tragic accident. Pharmaceutical poisoning is so difficult to trace when administered by experts. Or you could both understand that some research is classified for reasons that transcend individual conscience. Or, came a new voice from the ICU entrance, you could surrender to federal agents who aren't part of your conspiracy. Agent Sarah Chen walked in with a team of legitimate FBI agents, their weapons drawn and their intentions clear. Rick recognized her as one of the employees who'd been poisoned. Apparently, she'd survived and revealed her true identity as an undercover federal investigator. Agent Torres, Chen said with satisfaction. You're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, violation of the Geneva Convention, and about 30 other federal crimes we've been documenting for the past year. The arrest happened with swift efficiency, but not before Torres made one final threat. This research continues with or without Johnson Pharmaceuticals. We have facilities in 12 countries and defense contracts worth billions. Stopping me won't stop the program. As federal agents led Torres away, Rick and Nyla stood together in the ICU where it had all started, surrounded by evidence of systematic murder, disguised as pharmaceutical research. They'd exposed the conspiracy and survived the immediate threat, but now they faced a more complex challenge: rebuilding trust in medicine while ensuring that legitimate pharmaceutical research could continue without the shadow of weapons development. The woman who'd fought to save lives and the man who'd sacrificed everything to honor his father's memory had won their battle, but the war for pharmaceutical integrity was just beginning. 6 months later, the congressional hearing room buzzed with anticipation as Rick Johnson and Dr. Nyla Fisher prepared to deliver their joint testimony about pharmaceutical safety reform. The investigation into Agent Torres's conspiracy had exposed defense contractors in multiple countries, leading to the largest pharmaceutical fraud prosecution in history. Rick looked across the witness table at Nyla, who was reviewing her notes with the same meticulous attention to detail that had saved his life and countless others. She wore a navy blue suit that commanded respect while highlighting the natural elegance that had first caught his attention at the pharmaceutical gala that seems like a lifetime ago. "Are you ready for this?" Rick asked quietly, his hand finding hers beneath the table in a gesture that had become second nature over the months of investigation, testimony, and rebuilding. "I've been ready for this my entire career," Nyla replied, her smile carrying the confidence of someone who'd survived assassination attempts and government conspiracies while maintaining her commitment to saving lives. "The question is whether they're ready to hear what we have to say." The committee chairman called them to order, and Rick felt the familiar surge of protective pride as Nyla began her testimony. Over the past 6 months, he'd watched her transform from a passionate advocate into a national authority on pharmaceutical safety, her research now cited by medical schools and regulatory agencies worldwide. "Chairman Peterson, members of the committee," Nyla began, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd literally fought for the right to speak these words. "The conspiracy we've exposed represents systematic failure at every level of pharmaceutical oversight. But more importantly, it represents an opportunity to rebuild trust through transparency, accountability, and genuine commitment to patient safety." She outlined her recommendations with the precision Rick had come to love: mandatory diverse clinical trials, independent safety monitoring, and federal oversight free from defense contractor influence. Every word carried the weight of her grandmother's death and hundreds of other patients who died from preventable pharmaceutical failures. When it was Rick's turn to testify, he spoke not as the CEO protecting corporate interests, but as the son of a man killed by the very system he'd inherited. "Johnson Pharmaceuticals nearly died with my father," Rick said, looking directly at the cameras that would carry his words to millions of viewers. "The company was corrupted by defense contractors who saw patients as test subjects and profits as more important than human lives. But Dr. Fisher showed me that some things are worth more than quarterly reports or family legacy." He detailed the reforms they'd implemented together: the Johnson Fisher Foundation for Pharmaceutical Safety, which provided independent research funding for diverse clinical trials; the mandatory disclosure protocols that made all safety data publicly accessible; and the partnership with community health centers that ensured new medications were tested and monitored in the populations most likely to use them. "The woman beside me," Rick continued, his voice carrying unmistakable love and admiration, "risked her career, her safety, and her life to expose corruption that was literally killing people. She taught me that real leadership means choosing what's right over what's profitable." During the lunch break, they walked together through the Capitol building, their fingers intertwined as they processed the morning's testimony. The past 6 months had tested their relationship in ways neither had anticipated. Congressional investigations, media scrutiny, corporate restructuring, and the constant pressure of rebuilding an industry's reputation. "Do you ever regret it?" Nyla asked, as they found a quiet corner overlooking the city. "Destroying the company your grandfather built, sacrificing everything you inherited?" "How can I regret the decision that brought me you?" Rick replied, turning to face her fully. "Besides, we didn't destroy the company, we saved it. Johnson Pharmaceuticals actually matters now, actually saves lives instead of just claiming to." It was true. The reformed company, operating under strict oversight and transparent protocols, had become a model for ethical pharmaceutical research. Their first medication developed under the new protocols, a cardiac drug with comprehensive safety data for all populations, was saving hundreds of lives while generating sustainable profits through genuine innovation rather than market manipulation. "What about you?" Rick asked. "Do you regret getting involved with the CEO you came to destroy?" "I regret that it took a conspiracy and multiple attempts on our lives for me to realize that not all pharmaceutical executives are enemies," Nyla said with a smile. "But I don't regret falling in love with the man who was willing to sacrifice everything to honor his father's real legacy." As they prepared to return for the afternoon session, Rick stopped and pulled Nyla into an alcove, away from the congressional staffers and journalists. The privacy reminded them both of that night in his apartment when they'd first made love, surrounded by evidence that would eventually bring down a conspiracy spanning multiple governments. "There's something I need to ask you," Rick said, his voice carrying the nervous energy of someone about to take the biggest risk of his life. "Something I've been thinking about since the night you saved my life." "Rick," Nyla said softly, seeing something new in his expression. "I know this isn't the most romantic setting," Rick continued, reaching into his jacket pocket. "Congressional hearings aren't exactly what most women dream of for marriage proposals." Nyla's breath caught as Rick dropped to one knee in the marble hallway, pulling out a ring that caught the afternoon light streaming through the Capitol windows. "Dr. Nyla Fisher," Rick said, his voice steady despite the magnitude of the moment. "You saved my life, my company, my soul, and my understanding of what it means to actually serve others. You've made me a better man, a better leader, and a better human being." Tears gathered in Nyla's eyes as she realized he was actually proposing, here in the center of political power where they just testified about reforming an entire industry. "Will you marry me?" Rick asked. "Will you be my partner in life, the same way you've been my partner in fighting for pharmaceutical justice? Will you help me spend the rest of my life making sure medicine actually serves the people who need it most?" "Yes," Nyla whispered. Then louder, "Yes, absolutely yes." Rick slipped the ring onto her finger, a smaller solitaire flanked by smaller stones that caught the light like the tears of joy now flowing freely down Nyla's cheeks. As he stood and gathered her into his arms, kissing her with all the love and gratitude of someone who'd found his perfect partner in the most unlikely circumstances, congressional staffers paused to witness a love story born from crisis and tempered by shared purpose. "I love you," Rick whispered against her lips. "I love your courage, your brilliance, your refusal to compromise when lives are at stake." "I love you too," Nyla replied, her hands framing his face with tender certainty. "I love that you chose truth over comfort, justice over profit, and love over everything else." When they returned to the hearing room for the afternoon session, the ring on Nyla's finger caught the committee lights. But more importantly, their joint testimony carried the weight of two people who'd found love while fighting for something larger than themselves. They'd exposed conspiracy, reformed an industry, and built a partnership that would continue saving lives for decades to come. The pharmaceutical CEO, who'd been poisoned by his own industry, and the emergency medicine doctor who'd saved his life, had become living proof that love and justice could triumph over corruption and greed, and that sometimes the most unlikely alliances create the most powerful change. Their story had begun with poison and ended with promises. But their real work, building a medical system that served all patients with equality and integrity, was just beginning. 1 year later, the community health clinic in rural Georgia bustled with activity as Dr. Nyla Johnson. She'd kept her professional name but taken Rick's surname in their personal life, conducted the weekly medication safety seminar that had become a model for clinics nationwide. The same hands that had once saved a poisoned pharmaceutical CEO now demonstrated proper medication management to elderly patients whose complex prescription regimens had once been medical minefields. The Johnson Fisher Foundation had funded comprehensive pharmaceutical safety programs in over 200 communities, ensuring that patients like her grandmother would never again fall victim to untested drug interactions. "Mrs. Williams," Nyla said gently to an elderly black woman whose medication concerns reminded her so much of her grandmother, "with these new protocols, your doctor will monitor not just your diabetes medication, but how it interacts with your heart medication and your arthritis treatment. No more guessing, no more hoping. Just comprehensive care designed specifically for patients like you." Rick watched from the clinic's garden entrance, his heart swelling with pride as he observed his wife doing what she did best, saving lives through education, advocacy, and genuine care for patients who'd been overlooked by the medical system for too long. The past year of marriage had only deepened his understanding of her extraordinary dedication to medicine. "She's remarkable," said Dr. Jennifer Hamilton, Nyla's research partner, who'd become the foundation's director of community outreach. "The safety protocols she's developed have reduced pharmaceutical adverse events by 60% in participating communities. She's been remarkable since the moment I met her," Rick replied, his voice carrying the warmth of a man completely in love with his wife's brilliance and compassion. "I just had to nearly die to realize it." A reformed Johnson Pharmaceuticals had thrived under their joint leadership, Rick handling business operations while Nyla oversaw all research protocols and safety monitoring. Their first medication developed together, a cardiac drug with comprehensive multi-population testing, had received FDA approval in record time due to its thorough safety documentation. As Nyla finished her seminar, she spotted Rick waiting in the garden and felt the familiar flutter of joy that still surprised her after 18 months together. Their love had been forged in crisis and tempered by shared purpose, but it was the quiet moments, like him waiting patiently while she worked with patients, that reminded her how perfectly matched they were. "How did the morning session go?" Rick asked, as she joined him among the medicinal herbs her grandmother would have recognized, many of which were now being studied by Johnson Pharmaceuticals for potential therapeutic applications. "Mrs. Williams reminded me why we do this work," Nyla replied, settling into Rick's embrace with the ease of perfect compatibility. "She told me that for the first time in 20 years, she's not afraid of her medications." "Your grandmother would be proud," Rick said softly, his lips brushing the top of her head. "She would be proud of both of us," Nyla corrected. "You've transformed an entire company, an entire industry approach to patient safety. You've made pharmaceutical research actually serve the people who need it most." Their phones buzzed simultaneously with the same message: congressional approval for the expanded Pharmaceutical Safety Act, legislation they'd helped draft that would require all drug companies to follow the protocols they'd pioneered. It was the culmination of a year of advocacy, testimony, and tireless work to prevent future tragedies. "We did it," Rick said, looking at the notification with wonder. "We actually changed the system." "We're changing the system," Nyla corrected, with a smile. "This is just the beginning." As they walked together through the clinic garden, past patients who now trusted their medications, and families who no longer feared pharmaceutical complications, Rick reflected on the journey that had brought them here. A year and a half ago, he'd been a pharmaceutical CEO, focused on quarterly profits and board approval. Today, he was a husband, a genuine reformer, and part of a partnership that was literally saving lives around the world. "Any regrets?" Nyla asked, as if reading his thoughts. "Only that it took a conspiracy and multiple murder attempts for me to find you," Rick replied, stopping to face her fully in the afternoon sunlight. "And that your grandmother and my father didn't live to see the reforms their deaths ultimately made possible." "They see them," Nyla said, with quiet conviction. "Every time we prevent a pharmaceutical death, every time we ensure medication safety for underrepresented populations, every time we choose transparency over profit, they see the change their sacrifices created." and in that moment surrounded by a thriving community clinic, funded by love and built on justice. Rick and Nyla understood that their story, which had begun with poison and proceeded through passion, had become something larger than either had imagined. They'd found love worth fighting for and built a legacy worth living for, proving that sometimes the most powerful medicine is the healing that comes from two hearts committed to serving something greater than themselves. Their pharmaceutical empire had been rebuilt on foundations of love, transparency, and genuine care for all patients. And every life they saved together was a testament to the transformative power of choosing courage over comfort, justice over profit, and love over everything else that the world might value more highly. Because Dr. Nyla Johnson and Rick Johnson had learned that the greatest prescription for a meaningful life is finding someone who shares your deepest values and spending forever making the world better together. What do you think about love stories where two people find each other while fighting for something bigger than themselves? Have you ever seen a couple whose shared mission made their relationship even stronger? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories about love that changes the world. Tomorrow, we'll explore another tale of unexpected romance and the courage it takes to fight for what's right. Like this video if you believe in love that heals not just hearts, but entire systems that need reform. And remember, sometimes the most powerful love stories begin with choosing to save someone who represents everything you thought you opposed.